Today we do values, trauma, and relationships.
Oosh, there we go.
I know, it's a lot. And obviously works really well together.
Yeah, I was going to say.
For a dialogue.
It kind of.
Yeah, I know. You never know what the bull's going to draw for us. And so this is exciting. So let's talk about values. And values are really important. I think everyone should take time to identify what their values are, what that looks like. And those are really just principles, standards of behavior that we abide by. Each person's entitled, kind of like boundaries. You create your own set of values.
Your own rules of life and what you want to live and, I guess, abide by.
Well, that's it, right? Like these are your rules of engagement for life, and you can change them just like everything. You can change them as your life changes and you have different experiences. Like for me, one value that's always been really strong is treating people the way I want to be treated.
Of course.
And that is, I always remind myself that, and it's always when you're in the most challenging of times that you really have to. Your values are really what's going to guide you and direct you in the hardships, because there have been many times where, of course, I wanted to do anything but that. And that's the reminder of, no, this is who you're choosing to be. And these are your values that help keep me aligned with who I've chosen to be. And so I act out, not just, the belief system, but my actions are aligned with treating people with kindness. So values can be anything, respect. They can be kindness. They can be, do you have any values
Well, there's lots of different things I will value on depending on the person I talk to.
Sure.
So it varies, but I hold myself to a certain standard, and usually when I do that, I try to have that almost same expectation to others. Mm-hmm. Right. So if I'm going to treat you with a certain level of respect, I hope you do the same. If I'm going to value my time, I hope you are the same. Mm-hmm. So I guess you'd say one thing that's big for me is being punctual. Like usually I'm always on time or there, and something that's not always like that really grinds my gears. So I'm like, I'm down, maybe not value this person as much now because of the fact they're not respecting my world. But again, their world's different than mine, right?
Right.
So that's just how I value what I think's important. And everyone's got a different level for what that is for them. Right?
Well, they do. And the thing is, too, is like you can't expect other people to abide by your values. And of course, that can trigger, us in certain instances, because it takes work in order to stay consistent with your values and like.
And if you can line that out for somebody when you first meet them or work with them, it kind of makes it a little easier for you to communicate with that person. Mm-hmm. Like I'll go back with Bob. He used to always be like, first day I started working with him, really, he goes, when I asked you for something, Chris, I expected it yesterday. Mm-hmm. Do you see how that works here? Mm-hmm. So I knew that this guy values getting
promptness, immediate.
You got to do it. So I know how to communicate to him and not do the opposite where that will ruin that type of relationship.
Well, and it's and that's fair, and it's tricky. So it is a good way to create a safe environment with people when you start a relationship where you're connecting with people and you establish your values or you communicate them. Now, the key is don't communicate values that you don't follow suit with. Yeah. Right. Often people, there's the manipulation where it's like, these are my values, but I'm going to act out in every way that is in opposition to these values. That becomes problematic. So if you're someone that truly wants to be, the best version of yourself and show up in an authentic and wholesome way, you need to take time to identify what your values are, and you need to walk the walk. And so every action you take in life, not just your language, is consistent with your values. And I mean, we see people in history, like I think of the Buddha, there's certain values that come to mind: mindfulness, peacefulness. Mother Teresa, you think of certain people, there's certain values that come to mind. So painting that picture for yourself about, when people see you and they interact with you, what values do you want to impress upon the world, right? And, so then we get into trauma. And trauma is going to challenge your values.
And it's going to change a lot of, it can, depending if you allow it to.
Right. But it will shake you a little. And I think when you have trauma and you experience healing your trauma, that's when you start to redefine your values and decide, who is it that I want to be and how is it that I want to show up? I mean, we've all gone through hardships and then say, you know what? This is now the person I want to be, and this is how I want to show up in the world. And you change your value system. Everything's relative. It's by comparison. And sometimes you need to have your values challenged in many ways to say, are these the values that are unshakable for me? And what is going to help direct me in a positive way in life? And so I think trauma has a great, a key position in this, because trauma will help you decide in many ways who you want to be. And that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's very tough. You have certain guidelines of how I look at it's relationships. So use that as example since we're here. You have a list of things you value in a relationship, and hopefully your partner meets those criteria. When they don't, that's when usually the chaos can kind of happen, right? And that's when we see the fighting happening or the infidelity in certain situations, and that really spins man, I really valued somebody that was a this way, and this person showed them the other.
That's right.
It kind of really wrecks people in their frame of mind. Even me, like I've gone through it where I thought I was going to be a specific person for forever, and it didn't work out that way, and it wrecked me for like half a year. I was like, why did this all happen? But I've been able to reframe my mind now when it comes to relationships when my values are not met that I like, and vice versa, or there is trauma there. And there was a book that was read to me, I think I told you about a long time ago, A Little Soul in the Sun, right? And that book was about...
Neil Donald Walsh.
Yes, that's exactly it. So he was talking in that book how like we made agreements before we came on this earth with other souls to show us things here. So if somebody is mean to you or someone does something ill will or harmful to you, instead of being upset with that, know that you asked for that type of experience to teach you something, a positive lesson or a blessing, depending on how you want to look at it, right? So when those circumstances happen, I can, peel back those layers, like, what does this really mean? And what can I learn from moving forward instead of sitting in the trauma of it all for longer than what I did before, which was 6 months. Now I can get over that a lot quicker because I'm practicing it.
Well, and things with relationships, like, when we talk about relationships, anything that you have an experience with, it could be a person, it could be a situation, it could be a job. I look at everything as a relationship because even when you're, let's say, deciding to leave a job, or let's say you're fired, right? That's a relationship that has ended. And you have to look at that relationship as a learning experience and what relationship you had, like what attachment and connections you had to, let's say, that job. Because we often, I think, relate relationships to just people. But if you look at things, because you still have to go through the same emotional spectrum, you have to grieve it. You have to go through the anxiety and the fear of not knowing what the future holds and all those feelings until you get to courage and you start to rebuild yourself. And when you're in those higher frequencies, that's when you start to rebuild your value system. And you can only get there if you navigate the trauma. So in that example, if you lose your job, there's trauma there. And we know the only way to heal trauma is you have to feel your emotions. Yeah, you have to feel the emotions that are associated with it, because as you feel, that is the healing. And so then you can move through and get to a place where now you feel good, you have courage because you're excited about taking on new challenges, and you start to set those values. And that's going to help you create these healthy environments where you start to learn about yourself and identify who do I want to be and how do I want to show up. And it's really important because my values have saved me so many times as a reminder of who I want to be. Because sometimes you're in moments where you're not who you want to be.
No.
And you're triggered and you want to just react and be someone that comes from a place of having a lack of emotional control. One thing about people is their opinion is always going to be based on their ability to control their emotions.
Yeah, and we see that with, with criminals who like assault people or get into fights or kill people. They like, I don't know what happened. Well, they let their emotions override their whole system and weren't able to handle that. So that means their values was so disrespected and so far gone, they didn't see another way of dealing besides how they responded, which obviously wasn't the greatest.
Well, yeah, and we all do. Like, we get to these places where we're reactive, but your value system is what's going to keep you true to who you are. And it's going to help you show up differently in relationships, right? In relationships, again, it's all about that connection you have with people. And they can be friends, they can be partners, they could be, again, experiences in jobs, in careers. Everything is a relationship. And you may have different values for everything in your life. And you're going to connect more readily with people who have the same values.
Yeah, it's usually the case.
Yeah, especially like when, as a parent in parenting, absolutely parenting is much more seamless when you have a partner.
It's in line with the same values. It's tough.
Yeah.
I remember having those conversations with, a girl I was seeing before where we saw raising kids very different, and then we never ended up going down that route. And that was a big reason for it. She's very like a helicopter type parent, and I'm very opposite of that. And I'm like, this would just be a nightmare for us dealing with it. And we got to experience that kind of when we had a dog. So dogs were a good little example of that. Yeah. Like, she freaked out if the dog would go near the lake. And I'm like, that's what a dog's going to do. Like, it's not going to die. Like, let it go.
Yeah.
And she'd lose her mind over, like, it's going to drown, right? And so I saw that. I'm like, oh, my God. Imagine as a child, we're going to have to battle that every day. We don't have the same values on that aspect. And so hence why that didn't happen. Thank God.
Well, and good, important conversations that you should have at the beginning of any kind of relationship. Again, even if it's entering the workforce, even professionally, just have those values and have that conversation, whether it's with yourself or with the other person, which would be helpful when you're...
Yeah, and businesses and companies always has like a value statement or a values proposition. I remember I worked in a gym in Oakville, and one of the things we valued a lot, and that was like, we didn't break this value with any of our staff, was no one was going to be on PEDs or steroids that were coming to our facility, even set, right? So we had, unfortunately, interviewed people that we couldn't really take them on. Now, does that mean that's a bad person? Does that mean anything? No, it's just... No. We don't want to have that as a model because a lot of our clientele are looking up to us as a role model. So when they see somebody like that, they're going to assume right away that you're natural and this is how it works. And we don't condone that type of behavior in here. So that was a value that we did not budge on or move at all when it came to hiring or even particular clients.
Well, the house rules of engagement. Your values will determine how you interact, right? So it's really important to set those values. So I mean, I would suggest people take time to explore the different values, look at the values that maybe you've even been raised with.
Yeah, I always say when I work with Bob, he always likes to do this, is you write down like a values proposition, we would call it. So you write down all the things you value, and you list like importance. And then you things to put on there also on that list, maybe things that you would like to value at a high level, but you're not. And then you look at it all, and then you're like, okay, which one of these like items here am I going to really hold at number one, and which is going to be the last? And then moving into relationships or business, how does that change? And you can create like a whole chart of all the things that you weight, and that'll make a better decision for you picking partners. I remember when I was working with Bob, I wanted to work with a specific person, and I kept attracting lazy people. And I'm not a lazy guy at all, so this is driving me mad. So then Bob made me do that. Once you write down all the values and traits of a person that you would like to work with on a sheet. So I wrote down like all the things that I would value, like punctuality, discipline, self-motivated, a list. And I'm like, I don't know. And all he told me to do is write down that list, and for the next 90 days, write it every day. And then start thinking about these traits, and then start acting these traits too, because there's probably a couple things here that I'm not doing at 100. And so I started doing that. Like, you know what? I'm going to do more of this. I'm going to do more of that. And then within a couple of weeks, this is a true story, my friend Evan showed up in my life running after my car at a snowstorm. And he ended up matching that list perfectly. He was one of my top sales guys for the entire year. And it was crazy like how that happened in a switch. And all those people that were around me that were really pulling their weight, I would say, kind of fell through the wayside, and we kind of took off on a huge trajectory moving forward just by doing that, like listing that out and focusing on it.
Well, you created awareness, right? You put your attention towards the direction you want it to go in. You set your intention by stating your values almost in essence. And again, energy flows where intention goes. So your intention, that is how it works. And that's how simplistic it is. And I think we complicate things in life. But ultimately, these simple tasks like identifying your values, making sure you know what's important to you, you will then start to head in that direction. And if you show up every day and you act in the way that you want to receive and the things you want to receive, that's the law of attraction, and that's how it works. And immediately things start to shift, whether you're realizing it with immediacy or not. Sometimes they take time, but it is, and it's hard. We were talking about having that blind faith, and it's really hard to do that sometimes because you don't see what's happening behind the curtain. You don't see the chaos, the movement, the orchestration. You just see the show when the curtain opens. And so sometimes we can lose that anticipation or that motivation. And I do that, you do that. We all do that as humans, right? And it's important to just, again, go back to your value statement, identify the values you want to have in all the relationships in your life and how you want to show up. And your life will start to kind of magically change. And it's pretty fascinating to experience. And especially after having a bad day, to get yourself into a better mindset and then experience that goodness that comes when you're in a good place, I think is really valuable. So I hope you take time to identify your values because there is great worth in that.
Yes.
And you'll start to experience the life that you truly deserve and want to live. So thanks for tuning in.